Hi everyone! Here is your pre-book discussion video for Class 5 where we were reading 3 chapter books. One of them with a lot of illustrations for younger kids. One of them, Joey Pigza Swallowed the Key, which is sort of the ideal kind of 4th, 5th grade book. And then finally, The Birch Bark House by Louise Erdrich, which I know that you read the article by Robin Smith, and she talks about using this as a read aloud in 2nd grade, although it's more commonly a 3rd grade read aloud, and maybe read by students in the class, like in 6th or 7th grade. So, and I'm going to start by talking a little bit about chapter books and using them in the classroom. Now, I know a number of you are teachers, and so this is going to be kind of review to you. But there are lots of reasons why one would use chapter books written for children in the classroom. Even though at this age, kids may be ready to read books written for adults, but there are just all kinds of reasons why these are better. So I think the primary one is the fact that books for this age are very strong on characterization. The really good books here have a character that kids can identify with. And that character could be a mirror or a window. So if you think about Joey Pigza, kids who don't have ADHD, for instance, he might be more of a window. On the other hand, I would say that even the best behaved student will recognize Joey Pigza, will recognize elements of themselves in Joey Pigza. And in their case, there are impulses they think about, but they don't follow. And when you think about it, this is also the age when children are starting to form really deep and lasting friendships. And so, the idea that they're also finding friends within books just kind of makes sense. They're ready to really, understand a character who's quite well developed. And, a plot that's exciting can be helpful. Conversation in books like this. This is when you start seeing books written in the first person. Most young adult books are written in the first person. And books for this age, you're starting to see that. But not all of them are. Obviously, in the books we read today, 2 are first person and 1 is not. And then the other thing about chapter books at this age is that books that have a lot of description will sometimes sort of slow down the reader. And that's one reason why something like The Birch Bark House or Charlotte's Web, books that are beautifully written, but that do talk a fair amount about their settings, that those books especially work well read aloud. And I'll talk a little more about reading aloud in just a minute. And then, again, this is the time when kids might be all reading the same book within your classroom. And then another possibility is they might be doing literature circles. And lit circles, there are lots of different ways to do them, but kind of think of it as a bunch of mini book clubs within your classroom. And this is one place where the sorts of things you're doing in your bibliographies could come in handy. So let's say you've got 6 books that are all kind of around a similar topic or theme, and the kids can choose which of those books they really want to read. And then, there's a circle of like 5 or 6 kids who are all reading the same book. And those are generally I don't want to say self-motivated. That's not what I mean. Kind of self-driven. So in other words, each child in the lit circle has a role. And so they'll figure out together, what chapters they're reading when and what they talk about, how they talk about them. And then eventually, talking about the book to their classmates. Because everybody knows that a teacher can give book talks forever, but a book recommendation by a fellow student carries a huge amount of weight, uh, much more than any teacher book recommendation is ever going to carry. Anyway, other tactics include, holding up the book and talking about what's on the cover, like what's the title, what do you think might be happening, what's the picture on the cover, and the thing I told you before about the teacher who said, what does that little circle mean? And, of course, that answer was it means adults think this is a good book. But it can be a lot of fun to just start speculating, and then it sort of provides a little bit of suspense. So then when the child starts reading the book, they are thinking about all those things they're going to find out by reading the book. So the other thing that can really help get a class started reading a book that might be a little bit difficult for some of them is for the teacher to read the first chapter aloud, or to bring in an audiobook and everybody listens to the audiobook first chapter together. And again, it does the same thing where you're put into the world of the book, and then you want to know what happens next. And then the other reasons for reading aloud, and some teachers continue reading aloud all the way through high school. And there's some really great reasons for doing it. Obviously, it allows the students to listen rather than perform. And it dispels the idea that reading is always work. Then by hearing the book read aloud, it helps to build vocabulary. So words that they might stumble on when reading a book for themselves and then have to go look up, etc., etc. Generally, if you're listening to a book being read, you can get a sense of what the meaning is by the context, because the person who's reading it aloud understands that word and knows how to read it aloud, so that the context is made more clear. Let's see. Yeah, there are all kinds of reasons, and I'm hoping we have time in class to talk about different teachers' techniques for sharing books, or in your discussion books if you've got teachers within your discussion. Another thing is that by listening to a book read aloud, there's some kids who are such voracious readers that they zip through a book just reading for plot. And when you hear it read, it sort of slows you down, so you're actually taking in the full book. The article you read by Robin Smith is a great one. There's another one I want to point out, which is a letter to her second grade parents about how they can help their emerging readers. So I will give you a link to that article as well. And then something else I want to be sure to mention to you is Jim Trelease, the Read Aloud Handbook. There have been many, many editions of this because, for obvious reasons, he keeps updating it. So Jim Trelease is a teacher, and the thing about this book is he not only talks about why reading aloud is such a good idea in schools, but he also has sections where he goes over individual books and why, and what ages they're good for, and gives that sort of plot points and all of that. So this is a terrific resource. If you're buying it for yourself, obviously you want to get the latest edition, because that will include also some really recent books. One of the things, I'm just going to read you a little passage from Jim Trelease from an introduction to an early edition of this book. He says, "It is through fiction's escapism, putting ourselves in the place of the characters in books, that we stimulate the soul of creativity, the imagination. And it is this role-playing that leads us to an awareness of others, and more importantly, of ourselves. Can we really believe that a child is going to develop a sense of self doing reading skills for 40 minutes a day, 5 days a week, 30 weeks a year? Does an uninterrupted diet of skill and drill make a child want to escape into the world of books or away from it?" So I really like what the things Jim Trelease says about books and how not to kill them. Another good resource is that Carol Hurst's reading website. It was one of the very first children's lit websites to go online, when everyone was still trying to figure out how to design websites. And she died a number of years ago, but the site keeps going. And there are just some terrific suggestions for using specific books in a classroom. And the thing I love about the Carol Hurst kind of way of doing things is that all of her ideas have to do with not kind of making you have to read the book thinking that, oh, I'm going to have to answer a quiz about this, and so they might ask me, what was this character wearing, and this, these sort of weird things that are sometimes put into quizzes by a teacher who just wants to make sure that the children did the reading. So instead, she has a way of teaching books so that kids want to do the reading, and they end up loving books. Anyway, so next up, I want to tell you a little bit about the people whose books we read today. Juana Medina. So she is fairly new on the scene. She was raised in Bogota, Colombia, and as you probably guessed, the Juana in this book is Juana Medina. It's fairly autobiographical. And she says that as a child, she never found herself represented in a book. And also that she was a less than stellar student because she had a tendency to draw cartoons during class and just sort of only be half listening. She ended up moving to the U.S. to go to Rhode Island School of Design. And since then, she's taught in a number of places. She currently lives in Northern Virginia. And she has won a number of awards, not just for her books, but also for her cartoons. She's both illustrates her own books and illustrates other people's books. The Juana and Lucas series now has 3 books, and the third one just came out 2 months ago. And let's see, she's received several awards for these, including the Pura Belpré Award. And of course, you've learned a fair amount about her childhood by reading this book. Jack Gantos, I'll show you the slide that you've now seen probably during 3 different classes. So I figure that after his visit with us, we now know a lot about him. So I am not going to spend extra time repeating all of that. But I will say that I want to make sure you know that there are 5 books in the Joey Pigsa series. And, there's a good reason why books for this age tend to come in series. Because children who are beginning to read chapter books, once they get to know one character, they want more of that character. And reading a sequel, they're starting it with a sense of familiarity. And that is comforting, and it allows them to dig deeper into that character's world. Which leads me to Louise Erdrich. So I first knew of Louise Erdrich as a writer for adults. And she's won awards for her novels, her short stories, her poetry, all of that. Birch Bark House was her first book for children. And right away she started winning awards for those books. And there are now 5 Birch Bark House books too. A little more about Louise before I show you those. She actually owns an independent bookstore in Minnesota called Birch Bark Books. And let's see. I think really what I want to do now is just show you the other books. So the first 3 in the series, Birch Bark House is of course the first one. The first 3 focus on Omaqueas, and she's a little bit older in each of those 3 books. And then the last 2 are the next generation. So Omaqueas is the mom in those books, and they are about her twin boys named Chickadee and Macoons. So again, great books, and extremely well written, and really good read-alouds. So, I have like all these notes on each of the sequels, which I will not go into in this video because I'm trying to keep it on the shorter side. Okay, so there's this huge part of this class that we usually start talking about much earlier in the semester because up until this year we have uh, looked at chapter books in our third class. And some of these chapter books lend themselves well for beginning to talk about what used to be called multicultural books. Um, and I use that in quotes because back when I was starting in the field, um, the idea was that a multicultural book was a book that featured characters and cultures that were sort of not your basic, white, uh, originally from Northern Europe kind of kids. So obviously, as a terminology, that has huge problems because it basically makes the whole idea of multicultural books into an other. So I am instead going to talk about what's been happening more recently. And in 2014, things actually started to get better in the children's book world. And I don't think this would have happened without social media. In fact, I know it wouldn't have happened without social media. So some educators started a hashtag, which was "We Need Diverse Books." And that was in sort of around the middle of 2014. And it just took off. And to the extent that the following year it became a .org, and which is still going strong. And one of the many things that We Need Diverse Books focused on was the fact that we need books that are diverse, that are by diverse authors as well. So kind of enough of these, white women talking about an African American family, because there are going to be aspects of that that they just don't get, and books that are told from within an experience are just much richer in the kinds of details that you can have. And I think that the main thing I feel in terms of diversity, um, and for me, the only time I kind of like to use the word multicultural these days is to say that I like to think of a multicultural approach to books, meaning that you want to share as many books as you can that depict as many specific experiences as you can. Um, because that is really how the whole windows and mirrors thing can become something that means something to the children who are reading these books. And so in 2015, another hashtag came up, which was hashtag own voices. So that was again this idea that that books need to be written from inside that experience. So I think, though, that the biggest thing that is finally happening in children's books is publishers are making a real effort um, to hire people who come from diverse backgrounds and economically diverse as well. In the old days, it was very hard to break into children's books without having an internship, and internships were not paid. And so for myself, this was tough because I didn't have money coming into this field. And I was working a retail job that paid me minimum wage. And I really realized that if I wanted to break into publishing, I had to have an internship. So I ended up getting a different retail job that allowed me to work on weekends and freed up 2 weekdays a week. And I got an internship at the Hornbook, and that's what finally opened doors for me. But, if it hadn't been for me really working on figuring that out, I don't think that really would have happened. And, careers in children's books generally don't make a lot of money, so it tends not to be so appealing to kids from families who are really trying to move up, be upwardly mobile. Um, that's not being a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer. It's a job where you're going to make enough to support yourself, but maybe not your family, who's also still struggling. So there's some really big efforts being made. For one thing, internships now across the board are paid, and they pay more than minimum wage. Thank goodness, finally. Um, but there are also a lot of programs now for high school students to have internships, and those programs are very aware of needing to have much more diverse hiring tactics. Because the real fact is, until there are more editors of color, you're not going to see the kinds of books that, an editor who's reading a manuscript by someone from his or her own experience is going to recognize all these little details that haven't been told before and need to be told. So that's sort of my very quick little talk about that. I've talked a fair amount about Rudine Sims Bishop, who's the one who started everyone talking about windows and mirrors. And this is a book that came out relatively recently by her called Free Within Ourselves, The Development of African American Children's Literature. This is a terrific book. Another book that gets used a lot is an older one, Using Multi-Ethnic Literature in the K-8 Classroom. This is one of these books that has chapters by a number of different people, and so the quality varies a fair amount. The one chapter that's really disappointing is the Asian Pacific American one, because in that one, the person who writes it talks about the fact that she needs every book that depicts an Asian American needs to sort of show the entirety of the Asian American experience, which really runs counter to what people generally think about what makes a good book, whether it's for children or for adults. That you need specificity. You need a character who you really believe and whose experience is unique to that person. And so it's not by reading one book about one African American that's going to really tell you much. It's reading a number of books from a number of different perspectives that begins to sort of open those windows for you. Anyway, and then the other one I want to bring up, sort of specifically having read The Birchbark House, and of course, many of you may have grown up reading the Little House books by Laura Ingalls Wilder. Well, The Birchbark House takes place at about the same time as those books. And of course, one of the problems with the Little House books is that there's some incredibly racist stuff in there. There's a minstrel show, and then of course there's always the fact that Ma hates Indians. And so Birchbark House, a lot of people see as sort of an antidote to that. So, if you are going to share the Little House books, you also better share the Birchbark House books, because that gives the other side of the story to some extent. This is another really great resource. It's written by Doris Seal and Beverly Slapin, who run the oyate.org website, A Broken Flute, and this is particularly about Native American experience in children's books. And one thing that's great about Oyate also is that they have individual book reviews and sections about how to deal with Thanksgiving and things like that. So that is, so that's sort of part of what I wanted to talk about. And then, again, I wish I could remember. I have not found these slides in my past lectures, so I just have this feeling that we didn't cover this. So I'm sorry if this is all a repeat. But I did want to point out a few things. Where did it go? Where did it go? Sorry about this. Here they are. Okay. Yes. So Kathleen T. Horning, who we know from Cover to Cover, she runs the CCBC, the Collaborative Children's Book Center at the University of Wisconsin at Madison. And they have, over the past several years, been gathering statistics about children's books and representation in children's books. And so the Horn Book has been publishing articles about that, either by Katie Horning or by someone else who's examining that research. And so I just want to show you some of the graphics that we made for those articles, so you can see, get a sense of the idea of the problems. So the bar that says about is the books that are about each of these cultures, and then by is the blue one, and that is, that's not so good. We do want to see more of the whole own voices thing. Um, there's a lot more in Asian American books written by Asian Americans, but we have a way to go for Latino or Latinx books, and especially for African American books. And then there's another kind of interesting thing when you look at. They also looked at books that depict animals and the gender specifics of those. Because when we talk about diversity, we should also be talking about gender as well. And there's this old myth that girls will read books that are about boys, that boys won't read books that are about girls. Well, this really has not been proved to be true. However, because a lot of people still feel that it definitely appears to be true, there are organizations like Guys Read that specifically sort of celebrate books that are kind of written for boys, which really means that they're about boys and they include things that might have been traditionally more masculine. And then I wanted to show you this infographic too. I'm a big fan of infographics, and it just will give you a sense of the whole idea of culture and animals kind of all in one infographic. And then finally, I do think I've already shared this, but it might have only been in one of those book talk videos. I wanted to draw your attention again to Grace Lynn's short video where she talks about what to do when you realize that your favorite classics from childhood are actually racist. So I'm going to leave you with that, and I think you're going to have plenty to talk about today. So that's all I'm saying, and I'll see you in class.